A veteran New York Times correspondent has been denied entry into Egypt. David Kirkpatrick was detained without explanation after he arrived at Cairo airport on Monday. The former Cairo bureau chief was then escorted onto a flight back to London the following day. The New York Times says Kirkpatrick's denial of entry is part of a broader press crackdown under President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Sahar Aziz is a professor of law at Rutgers University and director of the Centre on Security, Race and Rights. Joins me now via Skype from Newark in New Jersey. Good to have you with us. It's sort of another worrying development, really, isn't it, in the relationship between journalists and the state of Egypt?
Yes, and it's emboldened by the Trump administration. Pompeo was just there in January in Egypt and claimed that America was doing good in the Middle East. And last July of 2018, the White House and Congress released $195 million that had been withheld from military aid to Egypt on account of their human rights violations. So clearly what's happened is that the U.S. has caved on its commitments to human rights, which is consistent with the Trump administration, and that's emboldened President Sisi of Egypt to do things that had never been done in the past. It's one thing to oppress your own journalists, which unfortunately has been the case in Egypt over multiple decades, but it's very unusual for the Egyptian regime to exclude journalists of the stature of David Kirkpatrick from an international mainstream newspaper based on no grounds whatsoever. So clearly the Egyptian regime feels very emboldened to essentially refuse journalists from covering the country at all.
Do you think this is just a targeted approach to the New York Times? Because David was, in fact, the bureau chief of the newspaper when Egypt went through its Arab awakening between sort of 2011 onwards.
Oh, absolutely. David Kirkpatrick is known for being quite independent, particularly insofar as his willingness to critique the Egyptian regime and even the Sisi regime. And he recently published a book called Into the Hands of the Soldiers, which was at least viewed by many in the Egyptian government to be critical and to identify what happened in 2013 as a coup, which is anathema to the current Sisi regime. So it's absolutely no coincidence. But still, even previous journalists who are critical, or even David Kirkpatrick, when he was in Cairo up to 2015, he didn't experience expulsion. So what we're seeing is a ratcheting up of press repression that is both within the country. You have 25 journalists in Egypt, at least 25 that are imprisoned, and Egypt's rating is 161 out of 180 at the World Press Freedom Index. So Egypt is not in a good situation with regards to its press freedom, and that really undermines the government, the Sisi regime's efforts to increase investment and to improve its economy.
And indeed, one of our own journalists, Mahmoud Hussein, has been incarcerated in an Egyptian jail for nearly 2 years. And indeed, that was highlighted in many reports from human rights groups that have said that sort of Egypt, as you say, remains one of the most dangerous countries to be a reporter in. I mean, what happened to David Kirkpatrick, perhaps, is an experience that only underlines that, but it's sort of giving off, perhaps, a warning to international news agencies and journalists, certainly from Cairo, that if you come to Egypt and you want to report here, you're going to do it under our rules and regulations and with our very close eye on you.
Yes, and that doesn't put Egypt in a category of nations that are respected in the international community. I mean, this is essentially what the most extreme authoritarian regimes do. And it's contrary to Sisi's agenda, Vision 2030, and his aims to bring Egypt standing back up so that it's a source for tourism and that it becomes a place that at least Western tourists and tourists from the Far East who have the funds to come and travel look at it as a liberal, modern state. So it's quite confounding why the Sisi regime would do something like this. It's because now you see stories in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and it's going to be across the world where Egypt's reputation is going to be tainted, and all because they wouldn't let a very well-known and familiar and professional journalist enter the country.
We'll just see what the fallout of that is in the coming days. For the moment, Sahar Aziz, thanks for joining us from Newark.
Thank you.